The first scripture lesson today is Psalm 100. Hear the word of the Lord. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him, bless his name. For the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. Sharon and I are very pleased to be here on this, your 150th anniversary. It's always nice to go out on the road and visit places where we had been before, and we are very pleased to celebrate with you on this special day. It was a little over 30 years ago that Sharon and I came to Second Church with our sons. Tim was 12, Jonathan was 6. 17 years later, when I left, both had graduated from college. Sharon had gotten her master's and doctoral degrees in school administration-related fields. Tim now runs his own business in Florida. John went to Virginia Commonwealth University and became a medical doctor. He is now an ophthalmologist with New York University Hospital in Manhattan and is on their faculty. I believe he's an assistant professor. After I left here, I spent 11 years as the executive presbyter and stated clerk of Central Florida Presbytery in Orlando. It's kind of a Mickey Mouse place to be. I retired on the 1st of October of 2023. Serving as the executive presbyter, it was a lot like hosting the program Presbyterians Behaving Badly. There were a lot of challenges that had to be addressed, but in truth, it was Presbyterians behaving faithfully. And a highlight of my 11 years were the 2 churches that we chartered during that time. In Central Florida Presbytery, worship is still offered on Sundays in 6 languages: English, Spanish, Korean, Portuguese, Hungarian, and a small fellowship that worships in Arabic. People ask me, how do you enjoy being retired? And my stock answer is, I strongly recommend it. Well, I guess my returning here, I didn't realize this, but I'm your favorite former living pastor. I'm the only one. Evan, you're number 13 of 13. I was 12. I want to share some thoughts about the time I spent here with you at Second Presbyterian. First of all, where did that clock come from? I think there was a small clock there. But you really didn't need a clock when we first started here, because for the first 5 years I was here, our service was broadcast live on Bob Reinl's radio station. And I needed to be done by noon if possible so that the person over at the station could meet the top of the hour radio feed. If I didn't finish on time, they just cut me off. I was driving through town on the way up here this morning, and I passed the bank. Remember old Planters Bank? That's where we had our accounts. And I remember we ordered like 2,000 new checks to use, and they changed their name about a week or 2 later. They changed it to Stellar One Bank. I think our check said Planters Bank probably for the next 8 years. But Stellar One Bank, you remember that? That didn't take a lot of test marketing there. Stellar One Bank. Oh yeah, I banked with the old SOB down the street. I don't know, is there still a TV up there? No, it's gone. We used to have a camera up there, and it would take video of what's happening down front so the choir could see, but I suspected this time of the year they switched it to the football pregame shows up there. You know, serving communion is always something you want to do well. You want to serve communion without any errors or anything like that. I always wanted the congregation to see broken bread, so I would break the bread and hold it out, and then I would set it down on the plate, sort of turned at angles so you could see that bread is broken. Well, one time it was a round loaf, and half of it fell off the table, bounced down each step, and landed right about there. Not to worry, Stuart Sherwood came by and picked it up and put it in his pocket. And then there was a time where I wanted to make the dramatic pour of the wine into the chalice, and I kept tilting, and finally out came a clear stream of water. Don't know what was going on there, but from that point on, I became known as the pastor who changed wine into water. I really couldn't do it the other way around because I cut class that day that they covered that miracle. Do you remember rebuilding the pipe organ? Evan, you may want to study up on that because that was like 25 years ago, and it's probably getting to the point where you're going to have to think about it again. Yeah. But we rebuilt the pipe organ in time for the 125th anniversary, if my memory serves correct. Then there was the roof. I understand you fixed the roof over here after all these years. We put on a new copper roof, which was the rage in town. The Episcopal Church and First Presbyterian put on copper roofs. We put on a copper roof. And all of us were blinding anybody that drove through town on a sunny day. Will any of us still be around when it turns green? But the one thing I remember about that was I was told that the previous roof that had been put on cost around $25,000. We spent around $25,000 moving a power pole across the street. And we spent another $20-some thousand for the scaffolding. So we spent almost $50,000 before we did one bit of work on the roof itself. That, I think, cost around $200,000 in, I think, 2005, 2006, sometime in that time frame. How many church signs did we have to rebuild? I can think of at least 2 times cars wrecked outside on the corner. One time, a car was completely on top of the sign. After that, some of the men on the property committee got some really big round metal pipes, sunk them deep into the ground, filled them with concrete, and then built a nice little fence to hide them. It was sort of like an anti-tank barrier for our church sign. A couple of months ago, somebody plowed through the church sign at the church that Sharon attends in Oakland, Florida, and I saw that, I felt right at home. Somebody already mentioned the Baja mission trips. I started going on those in 2005 and went for 8 years. I can remember the Clemmers attending with me, Bob Rydell, Andy Easley, Sharon, and John. I'm probably leaving somebody out. That's the danger when you start mentioning names. But we'll never forget the time, kids at night, they would play basketball out in the courtyard. Willie Clemmer wanted to get a good night's sleep. So he got the basketball and hid it under his bunk so no one knew where it was. And we got a good night's sleep that night. And I could talk about the Bible studies that we had, Christmas and Easter cantatas that were offered, the Wednesday church night dinners and programs. You could usually count on mac and cheese, corn casserole, deviled eggs, pimento cheese sandwiches, among other things. Palm Sunday parades, the Sunday lunch bunch where we'd go out to eat after a Sunday service, youth hikes, youth sleepovers. Mary Rainey probably still feels those youth sleepovers in her back. But the thing that always struck me both back then and once again as I've returned here this weekend is looking around the sanctuary, I can see people who are no longer here. I remember there was an entire pew of people over here that lived on Parkview Avenue, one block off of Gypsy Hill Park. And slowly, one after another one graduated to the kingdom. I remember other longtime members like Louise Simpson, who died about 3 weeks before her 100th birthday. But I said at the time, she just didn't finish her 100th year. She had been in that 100th year all along, she just didn't make it to the end. And I understand that Genevieve Carey, a long-term member here, is now over 100 years old. Just a personal thing about my family here, Tim and John, in their older years, always sat in the balcony for church services. In fact, they sat right back there in the front row of that side of the balcony because they knew that from the pulpit they were directly behind that light and I could not see them. I preached for 17 years here. But probably no service was as memorable as when Jonathan, reading the scriptures as lay reader, mispronounced King of the Gentiles. He said genitals. I remember looking out, and you always looked for Bob Rydell when things like that happened. He was the barometer of how things were going over, and his head was beet red. A few years later, he came back from college, and wouldn't you know, he was lay reader, and the same word was there. This time he said Gentiles. I again looked out at Bob, and he went. I could go on, but lunch is waiting, and Evan is going to need some time. But I want to share a few final thoughts, and hopefully I won't step on his toes as I do this. But 150 years ago, this is something that I preached 25 years and 1 week ago. I did not preach during the 125th service. Julius Garbett delivered a message then. But 150 years ago, Lexington Presbytery and conventional wisdom said, don't plant a second church in Stanton. Lexington Presbytery said a church was not needed on the west side of town. That was the argument back then. We needed a Presbyterian presence on the west side of the town. 2.5, 3 blocks from First Pres on the east side of town. But 13 people, led by Jedediah Hotchkiss, said otherwise, and that motion to form the church passed with only 5 votes in opposition. In 1885, the church was struggling to pay off its initial building, so the Ladies' Aid Society was formed, the forerunner of Women of the Church, now Presbyterian Women, and they worked to retire the debt on that first church building. At the turn of the 20th century, conventional wisdom said, don't tear down the building that you just paid for a few years ago and build a bigger one. But that's exactly what Second Presbyterian Church did. And Dr. William Scott, pastor at that time, led the church in building a new structure, the structure that essentially is the one that we're in today. Scott went on to serve as pastor for 18 years. And then came the arrival of the Reverend R.L. St. Clair. Evan, in case you're wondering, Mr. St. Clair is our predecessor. Doesn't matter how many pastors came between he and you and I, he is the one that everybody thinks about when they think about pastor of Second Presbyterian Church. Reverend St. Clair helped the church through a financial crisis, was able to pay off this building 2 years before the Depression began, and then continued to serve the congregation for 37 years in totality. Through the devastating fire of December 2nd, 1946, the 15 months of worshiping at the Visualite Theater, and then the challenge in the late 50s where the presbytery suggested Second Church move to the north side of town, which was growing rather rapidly. The church persevered in this location, and Reverend St. Clair was followed by Julius Garbett and then Dennis Walker. As I concluded that message 25 plus years ago, I said this: conventional wisdom would say today that there are too many obstacles for Second Church to overcome. Its downtown location is contrary to 21st century out of downtown orientation many have. There's a lack of parking that only is getting worse. There's the struggle to identify what its mission is in the immediate area and so forth. But the history of this congregation has been to set aside the conventional wisdom in favor of the vision charted by the faithful women and men who worked to make Second Presbyterian Church what it is today. It is on their shoulders and upon Jesus Christ upon which we stand and move forward into God's future in faith, hope, and love. Thank you.